what's really sort of struck home to me is the interconnectedness of all of the talks so far. And there have been several themes that have sort of run through all of them. And they're themes as well that hopefully I'm going to cover in my own talk. Things like the importance of autonomy in education, the importance of playfulness. Bringing in playfulness is, for me, is so important, especially somebody with a drama and theatre background is incredibly important. And just, taking risks and enjoying taking risks. And being resilient, and then learning from things you've done. This idea of creativity, whatever that is, I'm not even going to attempt to define what creativity is. I suppose different things for different people. Also, another theme that's come up is the process, how the process is important, and the way learners learn, and the way we develop and evolve as teachers as well and as educators. Also things like the importance of continuous reflection. That's speaking from our point of view as educators. And for me, because I suppose the bulk of my work, of course it's academic, but it's very, very strongly based on classroom practice. Because in fact I probably should have begun by saying that a lot of my teaching at Christchurch is teacher training, the training of English language teachers. So for me, the practical side is paramount, and so for me, research, I suppose, is not necessarily reading tons and tons and tons of wonderful books and then writing about them, and then maybe adding a paragraph at the end about my reflections on that and that sort of thing. But it's more about an inwardly looking analysis of my own performance as a teacher and as an educator, reflecting on what I do, what the outcomes are, and then maybe modifying what I do or not as I go along. So that's another thing that seems to have come up, that came up this morning. Goran talking about a subject which is teachable or unteachable. And that chimed with me, because I'm going to talk about something which a lot of educators believe is probably unteachable, which is developing a teacher's interpersonal skills inside the classroom. So that kind of chimed with me a bit as well. And then finally, the word caring for, the phrase caring for our students came up quite a few times this morning, which of course is incredibly important. And especially when, in my job as a teacher trainer, very often one of the first questions I ask when I meet a group for the first time is why did you decide to become a teacher in the first place? Apart from the wonderful salary and the excellent holidays and stuff. Why did you become a teacher in the first place? And of course, fortunately, a lot of the time, a lot of the responses I get are based on the fact that teachers care about the students in their classrooms, and they want to be with them, they want to impart their knowledge to them, they want to develop their skills, and essentially the rapport between teachers and students is very, very important. Probably the most important thing for a lot of teachers. So I just wanted to kick off actually by saying, I'm sure by design rather than by accident, the day there's this sort of cohesion to the day which has been really, really stimulating, very useful for me so far. So I'm just going to kick off. I'm not very good, I'm afraid, with PowerPointing, and I don't know, when I created this slideshow, it does that between each slide. I'm sure somebody later on will tell me how I can stop doing that. Right, so I'd like to begin by explaining very briefly why for the past 5 years I've been researching what I've been researching, which is certain performance skills for language teachers and why they might be useful and valuable. My background, I started teaching English as a foreign language many years ago in 1991. That's when I first trained up. And I did that for a number of years. I was always interested in communication and language and all the rest of it. And after teaching for a few years, I realized that a lot of what we try and achieve inside a language classroom is very similar to, or there are certain comparisons that can be made with theatre and performance in terms of the way people communicate with each other and in terms of our understanding of each other and the way we interact with each other, and how the courses of a normal conversation sort of proceed or don't proceed for various reasons. So I realised there's a lot of overlap between my theatre and drama background and language teaching, and improving what we call communicative competence. So those people who aren't modern foreign language teachers or any kind of language teacher at all for that matter, you might not be familiar with communicative competence, but basically it's all related to equipping students with the language and the skills, and also things like the confidence and the spontaneity, the creativity to communicate in the target language. And so when you go on teacher training programs these days, especially for English language teacher training, the general approach that's often taught is called the communicative approach. And these bullet points down here just basically, very, very briefly, outline exactly what a communicative approach is. So it's all to do with identifying, basically, what students need to do with the language, with the target language in the real world. And then you break it down. So you look at grammatical structures, you look at lexis, which is vocabulary, you look at common collocations, which is words which are often found together, you look at functions of language, i.e. how we do things like apologise or ask for information, that kind of function. And it's also an analysis of spoken discourse. So when you look at real-world face-to-face communication and the stages it goes through, and the way, for example, people take turns to speak, when they know it's their turn to speak, when they pick up on people's body language, and all these little sort of clues and cues we get, which normally enable a conversation to flow more easily. So that's basically communicative language teaching, in very, very briefly. So, and so I realised with my drama background, my interest in theatre and acting skills, that these could be very, very useful for our students if they want to communicate with other people in the target language in the real world, be it in a social situation or business situation. So the register of language use as well is very important, the formality or informality, and drama can cater for those kinds of things as well. What's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And so for a number of years, I designed activities, lessons, syllabuses, all underpinned by a drama approach. And I found it to be very, very useful, very enjoyable, and it was very often received positively by students. And so that culminated in the publication of my book in 2003. So it's basically a book that demonstrates to teachers, it's a very practical book, that demonstrates to language teachers how they can use certain drama strategies to teach language, right? And then that was published in 2003. And then, because a lot of my work, as I said at the beginning, is to do with teacher training, that also involves sitting at the backs of classrooms and observing teachers doing their teaching practice, which can be interesting. Sometimes it's a bit soul-destroying, but on the whole, it's an interesting experience. And of course, a very, very useful experience. Because in fact, I think maybe, Brian, you talked earlier about, students wanting to just do it. Let me do it. Rather than, I don't really want to sit behind a desk statically, passively. I don't want someone to tell me how to do it. I want to actually have a go myself. And I think that's, so obviously the teaching practice element of a teacher training course is very important. So over the years, as I was sitting at the backs of classrooms observing teachers, there were a number of things that I kept picking up on, which I felt were very important because very often they affected the dynamics of the class and they affected the level of learning that seemed to be going on. And these were things to do with the teacher's interpersonal skills. So on a very sort of simple level, it would be things like the teacher not being aware of his or her non-verbal communication body language. Even something as simple as a smile. And obviously we're all teachers, so we know how stressful it can be. And during any lesson or any lecture, there are 1,000,001 things we've got to be thinking about, let alone how the students are getting on together and how they're learning from each other and how much they're digesting of what we're telling them and all the rest of it. there are other things that we've got to manage as well. So as a result of this, especially with novice teachers, is that they worry too much about the lesson plan, they worry too much about PowerPoint, they worry too much about the materials that they were going to use during their lesson, and all these kinds of things. And as a result of that, the actual interpersonal skills that they needed to help the class gel and work more productively together, they were missing. And so these are things I had to comment on during feedback. Just things like, did you know during that 45-minute lesson you didn't smile once? and of course, when you tell a student teacher this, they're aghast. They think, oh my God, the students must think I'm some kind of monster, because they just don't monitor their own body language. So as a result of this, during all the workshops that I continue to give, I realised that I needed to spend more and more time working on these interpersonal skills that seem to be very important. And again, with my drama background, I thought, well, hang on a minute. When you analyse how an actor is trained, how an actor approaches a role, how an actor approaches a film or a play or a scene or whatever, there are certain things that an actor does to go through that process in order to produce a performance. And so I started integrating, implementing certain kind of actor or performance-related skills into my teacher training work. And so that's basically the essence of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. I've just spent half the talk telling you what I'm going to talk about. Never mind. Okay. Okay, and these are basically the reasons... oh, hang on, go back. The reasons that I identified why these performance-related skills might be useful for teachers. First of all, they're very obvious, nothing scientific about it. And of course, we've all gone through education. If you talk to anybody and say, oh, tell me about a teacher from your secondary school or your primary school, more often than not, people will talk about the teacher's personal attributes, their personality, their character, their likability, their approachability. So these are obviously things which are very important to a lot of people. So that rapport between teachers and learners is very important, and the fact that the whole learning process is enjoyable. And it's holistic, it's whole person. We have to acknowledge that learners learn in different ways. I've got a daughter, she's got this most amazing memory. I'm not kidding you, you tell her something once and she'll remember it, unless it's something like, something she's got to do, like clean her room. But other than things like that, she's got this amazing ability to just remember facts. Of course, I'll probably hazard a guess and say most of us are not like that. We learn and remember things in different ways. Some of us are very visual, some of us are very kinesthetic. We talked earlier about wanting to go around and touch Brian's things. Sorry, his artifacts. No, that's even worse, isn't it? Brian. So some of us are very kinesthetic, I'm very kinesthetic, but some of us are very sort of audio-oriented, visual, and all the rest of it. So what I'm saying is, our teaching needs to acknowledge that, and by using certain performance-related skills, that's one way of achieving it. In fact, I've probably covered the first the three bullet points there in that bit there, and then ultimately, and I think this is extremely important, bringing a positive feeling towards your subject, and you personally as a teacher. And this isn't, I think Angela, you talked about ego. The word ego came up, and obviously I'm not talking about being a performing teacher, an egotistical performing teacher that has to be loved by everybody. I'm not talking about that at all. Well, it is nice, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about making that human connection with our students, and in my own experience, my own reading, my own training, etc., I've discovered that there are many things, as I said before, that an actor does during a process of creating a character. Because basically, what is acting? I don't know. It is a study of human relationships. Observation, for example, is extremely important. Picking up on people's body language, listening to very subtle nuances in the way somebody says something. Like you're talking to me, you're talking to me, all that sort of stuff. But so listening as well as an actor, listening is so important. Very often, actors don't talk about acting; they talk about listening and reacting to what somebody has just said to them, in order to make the exchange between the two characters spontaneous and naturalistic and believable. And the number of times I've sat in the backs of classrooms, and obviously I've got a much better view, really, than in a sense, than the teacher, because the teacher might be over here working with this student with her back to that class, to the rest of the class, and all the rest of it. So I've got this kind of lovely panoramic view of the classroom, and very often I see students ask questions, or express a confusion, or they want to contribute something to the lesson, and the teacher just doesn't hear it, because I don't know, that they're not in the moment. And that's another phrase that actors often use, about being in the moment, being there, rather than being too distracted by everything else that you've got to do. Yeah, okay. So another big reason, really, why I wanted to research this area is because in my field, I basically deal with overseas teachers of English. So the majority of my students are from overseas, but they're working within the state system within their country, and literally from all over the world. But I think this is true for state school teachers in this country as well. Basically, these kinds of interpersonal skills which I'm talking about, you've either got them or you ain't. And if you ain't got them, well, you will get them eventually, maybe after a few years down the line. So basically, it's, you'll sink or swim to begin with. So on teacher training courses, teachers, language teachers or teachers of any subject, they're taught the basic methodology. How to break down a language, how to present it to students in an accessible way, in clear chunks, and all the rest of it, how we learn vocabulary, grammar, blah, blah, blah. But those other really important things that go on in any lesson, and that applies to us as well, at a university when we teach seminars, those other things that we need to do, manage the class, manage behaviour, get students working productively, collaboratively, encouraging students to share, encouraging students to get on with each other, and encouraging them to work with different people. The way a teacher manages his or her rapport with the students through, things like the way, where a teacher places him or herself in a class. There's a big difference. If I'm teaching a class now and I stand here, I'm adopting the very high status position. If I go and sit over there, literally next to you, but actually teach the lesson from here, then the whole kind of dynamics in the room, they change. And so what I encourage teachers, my trainee teachers, to do is to be playful. And when they're teaching, to mess around, to play around, see what works, see what doesn't work, and continually reflect and do their own personal research that way. So they're little things that, and they're in a way quite obvious things, but they are things which are often overlooked by teachers because they are so stressed out with all the other stuff they've got to do. But also on teacher training programs, these kinds of things are often ignored, because I think the general consensus is, well, you'll kind of pick it up as you go along. And so going back to Goran's point about whether something is teachable or unteachable, I believe that these things are teachable. And in fact, I do teach them. And what I've done on this slide is I've just come up with a kind of a list of all the different roles that teachers have. So, we don't just impart knowledge to them. There are lots of other roles that we have to slip in and out of as well. You can probably think of more. They're the ones I came up with. Okay. But for you, Eddie, it'd be role model. But actually, but we are role models for our students, aren't we? Actually, and a lot of people believe that that classrooms are social systems, kind of, mini social systems. I believe they are. I really do believe they are. The amount of interaction we expect students to engage in. And so we as teachers, we do have to be a model for them, don't we? The way we expect them to be. And that's another key word as well, being, rather than doing. I'm very interested in how a teacher is, rather than necessarily what a teacher does. I think massive difference. They're connected, but there's a big difference. Anyway. Right, okay, so one idea that kicked me off, I read about this research that went on in Norwich. Loads of sociological studies, for some reason, take place in Norwich. I don't know why, what it is about Norwich. But as you can see from this slide, so some researchers, some lecturers at the University of East Anglia carried out some research in 5 Norwich secondary schools. 704 pupils were basically interviewed about what they considered to be the most important attributes of any of their teachers. And time again, words relating to personal attributes came out. And then one of the conclusions of the study was the single biggest factor affecting children's feelings about subjects was whether they liked the teacher who taught them. It's as simple as that. But we know that, don't we, really, from our own experiences? And, you know, with the research I carried out, for most teachers it was really important that their students liked them. But, I mean, there were a few who just said, it's anathema, doesn't matter to me, I don't care. You know, I've got a job to do, I'm a professional. Go into the room, tell them what I know, and then go out again, go home, sort of thing.
Sorry, Mark, I'm that disorderly pupil who says 2 minutes.
2 minutes, brilliant. Okay, so that kicked me off. One other comment was, some teachers are sad, and they just need to loosen up a bit. I'm sure the word like was inserted there a couple of times in that. Right, so I need to go quite quickly to, okay, so I carried out some very similar research. The Norwich research was from the student's perspective. My research was from the teacher's perspective and how they think they are perceived by their students. And these are the countries that the teachers came from, all secondary school teachers. Because I wanted to narrow it down a little bit. Okay, and so I'll just run through these very, very quickly. But basically, the question was, how do you think your students perceive you as a teacher? And these are the kinds of words that came up from the teachers. This is how they think they're perceived, or they maybe hope to be perceived. You know. But again, you know, they're all words, they're all adjectives that relate to a person's character, their personality. So these things are, you know, clearly at the forefront of people's views and feelings. Also, you know, because they were non-native speakers of English, I've got some rather humorous answers as well. One was permissive. You can get the gist of what they meant by that. One was willing. I mean, it's just my mind seeing an innuendo in there, but that's probably just me. And available. That's not just me, is it? That's funny, right? Okay, but these negative words as well. So you can see the majority of adjectives were positive, but there were some negative ones too. Okay, so these are some of the questions that I asked in my research. Is it important my students like me? They were the options. If I had more time, I'd get you to guess which percentage goes with which one, but I won't. So these are basically the answers. You know, probably not surprising. There you go. Now, the question of identity for me was very important. I was really interested in what happens to a teacher the moment they cross the threshold of a classroom, whether they transmogrify into some kind of teacher being, which is completely different from their out-of-classroom self. Because obviously, in the back of my mind, I was thinking of performance-related skills. Because what I don't want, or certainly what I don't believe that teaching is a performance. Because it doesn't ring true. It does imply that it's all a front, that you're putting on a mask. You know, there are elements, yes, but it's, you know, I don't see teaching as acting, basically, is what I'm saying. Okay, so they were the answers to that question, and these were some of the comments. You know, and we as teachers, you might read those and, you know, you might be able to relate to them or not.